The screen remains absolute black. A single match head rasps against a rough surface, a sharp sound in the stillness. The flare ignites, casting a sudden, flickering orange glow that cuts through the void. It reveals the edges of a brittle, yellowed parchment. The paper is curled, its borders blackened by fire, as if someone tried to erase it from existence. The ink upon it is faded, the script archaic and jagged, defying easy translation. This is not merely a relic of a forgotten age. It is a document that once commanded absolute silence. The flame dips, casting long dancing shadows across the lines of text. Each letter seems to pull away from the light, as if the parchment itself is trying to hide its contents. We are looking at a fragment that was never meant to survive the centuries. It is a physical anchor to a history that was systematically dismantled. The match burns down toward the fingers, the heat rising, yet the focus remains locked on the charred surface. This is the starting point of a long-buried obsession. The flame dies, but the weight of the document remains. Throughout history, certain manuscripts were feared not for their age, but for the specific, dangerous power they claimed to hold. They were the shape of things to come, written in a language that demanded total obedience. To possess such a text was to invite scrutiny, and to read it was to risk everything. These were not books meant for libraries or public study. They were documents that commanded silence, enforced by those who understood that knowledge is the ultimate currency of control. Empires rose and fell on the strength of the information contained within these vellum pages. When a scribe finished a final line, the ink was often blotted with the understanding that the words were a death sentence. The silence surrounding these works was not accidental. It was a deliberate, calculated barrier. It was a wall built of fear, designed to keep the future tucked away where no eyes could reach it. We are tracing the lineage of that silence. The suppression was not merely a local decree. It was a global campaign of erasure. Empires deployed entire legions to scour the provinces, hunting for these specific scrolls with a singular, ruthless intent. They burned the scriptoriums and razed the libraries, leaving nothing but ash and empty shelves behind. Yet, the keepers of the knowledge were equally relentless. They moved under the cover of moonless nights, spiriting away the vellum in lead-lined chests. These documents were carried across shifting dunes and buried deep within the heart of desert caves, where the dry heat would preserve the ink for eternity. In the damp, echoing shadows of remote monasteries, monks transcribed the forbidden lines into the margins of common prayer books, hiding the truth in plain sight. This was a silent war fought across centuries, a vast conspiracy of concealment. Tonight, we move beyond the physical ruins of the past to confront the ghost that still lingers in our collective consciousness. It is the persistent, unsettling belief that somewhere, buried in a forgotten vault or a sealed archive, there exists a single page that was never meant to be read. This is the ultimate transgression of the imagination. We are haunted by the idea that our reality is not a series of accidents, but a scripted event that has already been witnessed by a hand from the past. Why does this idea refuse to die? It persists because we crave a certainty that the world denies us. We look for the forbidden manuscript because we are terrified of the chaos of the present. We hope that if we find that one missing fragment, we might finally decode the architecture of our own lives. The mystery is no longer about the book itself, but about the void it leaves behind. That silence, where a prediction should be, is louder than any written word. We are driven by the fear that history is a closed loop, and that the future is already waiting for us in the dark, written in ink that we are not yet permitted to see. Before these texts became legends, they were the work of hands. In the dim, quiet air of the scriptorium, the only sound was the rhythmic scrape of a quill against cured skin. Monks and scholars sat hunched over narrow wooden desks, their eyes straining against the flickering light of tallow candles. They worked for hours, measuring the margins, grinding pigments into ink, and smoothing the rough surface of the vellum with pumice stones. Every letter was a deliberate, agonizing choice. They were not merely writing. They were anchoring knowledge into a medium meant to outlast their own lives. The air in these rooms smelled of dried parchment, iron gall ink, and the damp chill of stone walls. Each scribe moved with a steady, practiced precision, knowing that a single slip of the hand could ruin a week of labor. They treated the vellum with a reverence usually reserved for relics, stretching the skin until it was translucent and taut. This was the birth of the forbidden, a slow, physical accumulation of words. But history acts as a violent filter. The labor of the scriptorium was fragile, easily unmade by the chaos of the world outside. When empires collapsed, the libraries were the first to burn. Tongues of flame licked through the dry, stacked vellum, turning centuries of careful thought into black, drifting ash. Invading armies did not distinguish between common ledgers and sacred records. They saw only fuel or obstacles. Stone roofs caved in under the weight of siege, crushing the wooden shelves and burying the scrolls. Beneath layers of rubble and damp earth, the slow, relentless decay of time finished what war began. Moisture seeped into the archives, turning ink into illegible stains and parchment into rot. Entire lineages of thought vanished in the span of a single generation. This was not a selective loss, but a total erasure. The records did not simply fade. They were torn from the timeline, leaving behind a profound cultural amnesia. We are left with only the scattered remnants, the charred corners, and the torn fragments that somehow escaped the fire. These survivors are not complete stories. When the smoke cleared, the survivors found only the broken pieces. They picked through the debris of fallen archives, holding up charred scraps of vellum that no longer held a complete thought. A single sentence, isolated from its context, suddenly took on a weight it never possessed in the original library. Without the surrounding chapters to ground the meaning, the words became riddles. A list of crop yields or a mundane tax record, seen through the lens of catastrophe, began to look like a coded warning. The chaos of the collapse did not just destroy knowledge. It stripped away the mundane, leaving only the cryptic. People began to whisper that these were not lost books, but hidden ones. They claimed the manuscripts were suppressed by the very empires that burned them. The simple fact of a missing page was reinterpreted as a deliberate act of censorship. What was once a fragile physical record of daily life was elevated into a forbidden legend. The vacuum left by the fire was filled with speculation. Every torn edge and faded ink blot became a potential prophecy, a secret sign that the future had been written long before the world fell apart. The human mind abhors a vacuum. When a page is missing, the brain does not simply accept the silence. It fills the void with its own deepest anxieties. We stare into the empty space where a paragraph should be, and our imagination begins to breed monsters. We project our fears onto the blank vellum, seeing shapes in the ink stains that were never intended by the original scribe. A smudged line becomes a warning of plague. A jagged tear is interpreted as a prophecy of a falling throne. This is the architecture of the forbidden. The less we know, the more we invent. We construct elaborate mythologies to explain the absence, turning simple gaps in history into deliberate, sinister erasures. The imagination works with the precision of a master architect, building entire worlds of doom upon the foundation of a single, ambiguous word. We begin to see patterns in the noise, a rhythm in the chaos that suggests a hidden design. It is a feedback loop of mounting intrigue. The void is no longer empty. It is teeming with the monsters we have invited to live there. Now, we turn to the remnants. These are not merely dusty artifacts. They are the breadcrumbs of a larger, more dangerous truth. You hold a torn scroll, the vellum brittle under your touch, and suddenly you are no longer a reader, you are a detective. You scan the marginal notes, those frantic, hurried scribbles that bleed into the edges of the page. Why did the scribe pause here? Why was this specific sentence crossed out with such violent pressure? Every ink blot and uneven tear becomes a piece of evidence. In a centuries-old investigation, you are looking for the motive behind the silence. These fragments act as shadows, cast by a reality that has long since vanished. They force you to connect the dots, to infer the existence of a master text that someone fought to keep hidden. You begin to trace the logic of the missing sections, mapping the gaps as if they were coordinates on a map. The danger is no longer theoretical. It is tangible. You feel the weight of the secret. The cold realization that someone else once held this same fragment and felt the same chilling pull of discovery. The academic world remains a battlefield of conflicting truths. Historians lean over their desks, magnifying glasses hovering over ancient vellum, searching for the mundane reality beneath the myth. They argue that these texts are products of their time, mere reflections of contemporary anxieties, rather than divine foresight. They point to the lack of evidence, the absence of a master manuscript, and the clear signs of later interpolations. To the scholar, the mystery is a puzzle to be solved and dismantled with logic. Yet, this skepticism fails to penetrate the cultural armor of the legend. The belief in a forbidden prophecy is not a historical question. It is a psychological necessity. People do not search for these books because they want a history lesson. They search because they crave a map for the unknown. Even as historians debunk the claims, the myth grows stronger, fed by the very act of denial. The divide is absolute. On one side, the dry, sterile comfort of historical fact. On the other, the seductive, terrifying promise of a pre-written future. We find ourselves caught in the center, knowing the evidence is thin, yet unable to stop looking for the truth that we hope, against all logic, might actually be there. Beyond the scholarly debates, the legend of the lost page served a darker, more calculated purpose. Rulers and theologians realized that the unknown was a volatile force, one that could ignite rebellion or collapse an empire. By claiming the existence of a forbidden text that predicted the future, they transformed uncertainty into a weapon. The lost page became a convenient scapegoat for the unexplainable. When harvests failed or plague swept through the streets, the authorities did not point to their own incompetence. They pointed to the shadows, whispering of a manuscript that had foreseen the calamity, a prophecy that rendered the current order inevitable and unchangeable. This was the architecture of political dread. To suggest that history was already written was to strip the populace of the will to resist. It turned the future into a cage, and the manuscript into the lock. Fear became a tool of governance, a way to ensure that the people looked to the heavens or the archives for answers rather than to the throne. The obsession does not stop with stories. It demands physical contact. Collectors, scholars, and the desperate alike turn their attention to the debris of history. They hunt for the torn scrolls, the singed edges of vellum, and the cryptic marginalia that survived the fires of the past. These fragments are no longer viewed as mere historical artifacts. They are treated as keys, jagged pieces of a larger, hidden reality waiting to be unlocked. Each scrap of ink is scrutinized under harsh light, measured against the chaos of the present, and held up as a potential bridge to the truth. The search becomes a frantic, tactile ritual. Fingers trace the indentations of long-dead scribes, hoping to find a pattern in the pressure of the quill. The urgency is palpable. It is an obsessive hunt where every faded symbol is weighed for its prophetic value. People scour the archives, not for the sake of preservation, but because they are convinced that the right combination of fragments will reveal the architecture of what is to come. The boundary between historical research and blind faith dissolves. The hunt for the missing page has become a singular, driving force, turning the quiet halls of libraries into the front lines of a war against uncertainty. Yet, the deeper the search goes, the more the reality of the void asserts itself. We scour the archives for a complete prophecy, but we find only gaps. The mystery is not contained within the ink that remains. It is defined by the space where the words have been stripped away. This silence is not empty. It is a heavy, pressurized absence that commands more attention than any written line. When we hold a fragment, we are not looking at what is there, but at the jagged edge of what is gone. The missing section becomes a mirror. We project our own anxieties into that void, filling the silence with the echoes of our own fears. It is a psychological trap. The mind cannot tolerate the lack of an answer, so it begins to manufacture one, treating the silence as a deliberate omission. The lack of a prediction becomes a louder, more terrifying statement than any explicit warning could ever be. We stare at the blank parchment, and the silence begins to pulse with the weight of unsaid things. It is in this profound quiet that the obsession takes root. The terror of these forbidden books stems from a singular, dangerous premise. They represent the ultimate transgression, the theft of divine foresight. To possess such a text is not merely to hold a document. It is to seize a mirror that reflects the future, a concept that has unsettled the foundations of authority for centuries. This is the core of the danger. By claiming to hold the shape of things to come, these manuscripts move beyond the realm of history and into the domain of the sacred. They are treated as stolen fire. The act of reading them becomes an illicit intrusion into a domain reserved for the divine. It is the belief that history is not a series of accidents or human choices, but a scripted event that someone, somewhere, has already witnessed. This realization transforms the search. The hunter is no longer just a scholar or a collector. They are a trespasser. Every page turned is a step deeper into a forbidden architecture of secrecy. The stakes are no longer about information. They are about the audacity of humanity to look behind the curtain of time. This is why the legends persist. They speak to a primal fear that we have reached for a knowledge that was never ours to hold, and that the price is far higher than we are prepared to pay. The mirror of the future is a weapon that cuts both ways. For the rulers of old, these manuscripts were not just curiosities. They were existential threats. To hold a document that claimed to map the coming decades was to hold a blade against the throat of the state. If the future was already written, then the power of the throne was a fiction. Theologians faced a similar crisis. If a mortal could read the divine script, then the entire structure of faith, repentance, and free will collapsed into a single terrifying certainty. This is why the archives were sealed. It was not to protect the knowledge, but to protect the illusion of control. Every time a monarch ordered a text burned or a scholar imprisoned, they were attempting to shatter the mirror before it could show them their own end. This clash between the ambition of man and the cold, unyielding nature of destiny defines the history of these forbidden pages. They are caught between the desire to know the truth and the paralyzing fear that the truth will render their lives entirely meaningless. The true horror lies not in what the manuscript reveals, but in what it denies. If the future is already etched into the ink of a forgotten page, then the present is nothing more than a mechanical playback. We walk through our lives believing we are the authors of our own movements, yet the script suggests we are merely actors reciting lines written by an unseen hand. This is the claustrophobia of the inevitable. Every choice, every hesitation, and every sudden change of heart becomes a predictable beat in a larger, rigid structure. The walls of our reality seem to tighten as we realize that the path ahead is not a horizon of possibilities, but a narrow, predetermined track. We look for gaps in the logic, for moments where we might break the sequence, but the manuscript remains a silent, mocking witness to our lack of agency. The sense of control we cling to is revealed as a fragile, necessary deception. We are trapped in a narrative that has already reached its conclusion, waiting for the final page to turn. The air grows thin as the realization settles in. We are not living. We are merely fulfilling a requirement. If the script is already written, then someone has read it. This is the thought that stops the breath in the throat. We are not merely acting out a sequence. We are performing for an audience that has already seen the finale. Somewhere in the vast, cold architecture of time, a witness exists. It does not blink. It does not intervene. It simply watches as we stumble through the scenes it has already memorized. This realization turns the world into a stage where the exits have been boarded up. We search the shadows for the source of this gaze, hoping to find a flaw in the observation, but the silence only deepens. The witness is not a judge, but a record keeper, ensuring that every tragedy and every minor error follows the established path. This is the ultimate breaking point of the human psyche. To know that our future is not a mystery to be solved, but a memory to be recalled by an entity that stands outside our reach. The walls of our reality are no longer just closing in. They are being observed from the outside. The witness remains silent, but the stories it once inspired are stirring again. In the quiet corners of our digital age, where information flows like a flood, these ancient myths have found a new, fertile ground. We are living through a period of profound instability, and as the foundations of our modern world begin to crack, we reach backward. The old manuscripts, once dismissed as the superstitions of a simpler time, are being pulled from the shelves of our collective memory. They return with a vengeance, fueled by the cold sweat of a generation that no longer trusts its own trajectory. We see the patterns of collapse in our headlines, and we map them onto the warnings of the past. It is a desperate, physical reflex. When the present feels like a house of cards, we look for the blueprints of the storm. These stories are no longer just relics. They are mirrors, reflecting our own fragility. The myth of the lost page has become a siren song, pulling us toward the realization that the chaos we fear is not an anomaly, but a recurring, inevitable rhythm. We sift through the wreckage of the present, eyes scanning for a sequence that makes sense. We treat broken archives like a crime scene, dusting for fingerprints of a future that has already occurred. Every data point, every market crash, every sudden shift in the climate is treated as a piece of a larger, hidden puzzle. We spread the fragments across our desks, connecting dots that refuse to align. It is a frantic, repetitive labor. We look for the logic in the collapse, convinced that if we can just identify the pattern, we can predict the next tremor. We ignore the gaps in the records, filling them with our own dread. This is not research. It is an attempt to impose a grid over a void. We trace the lines of ancient prophecies onto modern maps, searching for an overlap that justifies our fear. Yet, the archives remain silent, broken, and entirely indifferent to our desperate need for a map. We stop looking at the parchment and start looking at ourselves. The obsession with these lost pages is not a pursuit of historical accuracy. It is a hardwired survival reflex. When the world loses its grip on predictability, the mind constructs a shield. We invent these prophecies to convince ourselves that the future is not a random collision of forces, but a scripted, manageable sequence. It is a psychological barricade. We build it brick by brick, using fragments of old myths to wall off the terrifying reality of our own helplessness. This is the true architecture of the forbidden manuscript, a fortress of belief designed to keep the chaos of the unknown at bay. We are not uncovering a hidden truth. We are manufacturing a sense of safety. The fear we feel is not for the future itself, but for the loss of our own agency. We cling to the idea of a pre-written destiny because the alternative is a blank, silent, and indifferent universe. We are protecting our sanity from the void. We must strip away the reverence. The ink on these pages did not flow from a divine source. It was scratched by human hands, often centuries after the events they claim to predict. Many of these so-called prophecies are calculated fabrications, written to influence the politics of their time, or to cement the power of a specific sect. We find the seams where the fraud was stitched together. The language is too precise, the historical allusions too convenient, and the tone too tailored to the anxieties of a later generation. This is not revelation. It is propaganda disguised as antiquity. We examine the vellum and find the marks of a scribe working with a clear agenda, not a prophet touched by fate. The mystery evaporates when we realize that these texts were designed to be discovered, to be feared, and to be believed. They are products of myth-making, constructed in the quiet of rooms where men sat and decided what the future should look like to ensure their own survival. We are looking at a mirror, but the image is a forgery. The weight we assign to these words is a weight we have placed there ourselves, ignoring the mundane, human reality of their origin. The search for a master manuscript is a search for a ghost that never walked. We scour the archives, we translate the fragments, and we wait for the one document that ties the threads of history into a single, coherent knot. It does not exist. There is no hidden vault containing the blueprint of the coming century. There is no master scribe who recorded the rise and fall of empires before they happened. We must face the cold, empty space where that proof should be. This realization is a violent rupture in our understanding. If there is no master text, then there is no script. If there is no script, then the patterns we have spent centuries identifying are nothing more than the noise of a chaotic, unguided world. We are left standing in the wreckage of our own logic. The intellectual crisis is absolute. We have built an entire architecture of belief upon a foundation of air. We look for the master manuscript because we cannot bear the weight of a future that is truly terrifyingly open. The absence of the text is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror reflecting our own desperate need for a design that simply is not there. Yet, the evidence, or the lack thereof, changes nothing. We stand amidst the ruins of our own logic, staring at the empty shelves, and we continue to reach for what is not there. This is the paradox of the human condition. We know the master manuscript is a fiction, a construct of ink and ambition, yet the hunger for it remains unappeased. We do not search for facts. We search for the comfort of a narrative that binds our chaos into a singular, predictable line. The mind rejects the vacuum. Where there is no proof, we invent a mystery. Where there is no prophecy, we manufacture a sign. We see a flicker of light in a dusty archive and call it a revelation. We hear a whisper in the wind and interpret it as a warning. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a profound, irrational drive to impose order on a universe that offers none. We cling to the myth because the alternative, a world without a script, a future without a map, is a silence we cannot endure. Why do we persist? Why do we keep digging through the dust of dead civilizations for a page that was never written? The answer is not in the archives. It is in the pulse of our own fear. We look into the past because we are fundamentally terrified of the future. The past is a closed room. It is finished, fixed, and silent. We know how the story ends because it has already happened. But the future? The future is a void. It is a raw, unshaped expanse that refuses to yield its secrets. We are haunted by the possibility that tomorrow holds something we cannot control, something that might shatter the fragile order we have constructed. So, we turn our gaze backward. We scour the old manuscripts, searching for a pattern, a code, or a prophecy that might act as a shield. We are not looking for truth. We are looking for a guarantee that we are safe. We are trying to outrun the uncertainty. We reach for the symbol, the fragment, the singular line of text that promises clarity. We imagine that if we touch the right page, the shadows will recede and the path ahead will be illuminated. But the archive is cold. The ink is dry. We find only the echoes of our own desperate questions. This is the final stage of the obsession. The moment we realize that the manuscript we seek does not exist. We are not looking for a lost prophecy. We are looking for a way to name the monster that waits in the dark. Every symbol we decode, every pattern we trace, is just a mirror held up to our own anxiety. We stand at the edge of the vault, staring into the absolute blackness, waiting for a sign that never comes. The terror is not that the page is missing. The terror is that we are the ones who must write it. The room is quiet again. The frantic search for meaning has exhausted itself, leaving only the physical reality of the space. On the table, the candle has burned down to a pool of hardened wax. The flame dances, a tiny, desperate light fighting the encroaching shadows. It flickers once, twice, and then vanishes, leaving the air thick with the scent of spent wick and cooling metal. The parchment lies beneath the cooling air, its edges curled and brittle. The ink, once so sharp and promising, seems to retreat into the fibers of the paper, becoming nothing more than a series of dark, illegible stains. The light that once revealed the secrets of the past is gone. The archive is silent. The vault is sealed. We are back where we began, in the dark, with nothing but the weight of our own thoughts. The match is out. The page is blank. The cycle of the search has reached its natural end, leaving the room in total, absolute stillness. There is no more light to read by. The darkness is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of the question we have been running from since the first match was struck. We came here looking for a map, a hidden truth, or a prophecy that could save us from the uncertainty of tomorrow. We scoured the archives and traced the faded ink, desperate for a sign. But now, in the stillness, the truth shifts. We must face the possibility that the search itself was the deception. Are we truly looking for a way to understand the world, or are we merely hunting for a warning? We want to believe that someone else has already seen the end, that the tragedy is scripted and therefore avoidable. We crave a sign that we can still change the outcome, a final page that grants us the power to rewrite our fate. If we find the truth, do we actually want to know it? Or are we just looking for a reason to keep hoping that the future is not as fixed as we fear? The silence of the room offers no comfort. It only forces us to look inward. We are left with the ache of the unknown, standing at the threshold of a future that remains stubbornly, terrifyingly unwritten. Perhaps the terror of the blank page is not that it hides a secret, but that it offers a choice. We spent our time scouring the dust of history for a script that does not exist, hoping to find a destiny we could either embrace or escape. But the archives are empty for a reason. The future is not a locked room or a preordained prophecy. It is a space waiting for the ink of our own actions. To realize that no one has written our story is not a loss of security. It is the reclamation of our own agency. We are not trapped by the echoes of ancient scribes or the warnings of forgotten vaults. We are the authors of the very uncertainty that haunts us. If we fear the dark, we do not need a map to tell us where to go. We need only the resolve to move forward. The search for the forbidden manuscript ends here, not with an answer, but with a release. We stop looking backward for a warning and start looking forward to the work that remains. The screen fades, the shadows dissolve, and the world outside the room waits. The page is not missing. It is waiting for us to write the first line. We have the pen. We have the time.